This Friday, Pope Francis landed in Iraq on a first-ever papal visit. The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean issued an annual report this Thursday, revealing that in 2020, poverty and extreme poverty in the region reached levels not seen in decades. Italy announced on Thursday it was blocking the exports of vaccines developed by AstraZeneca to Australia based on the European Union's regulations. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. And this Friday, Pope Francis arrived to Baghdad International Airport. With the motto of "We are all brothers," Pope Francis is making a historic visit to Iraq. The head of the Catholic Church will hold meetings with bishops, priests, religious men and women. One of the most significant one with the Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani. Described by the Pope himself as a long-awaited and much-desired trip, this will be Francis' first international tour after 15 months without mass public activities due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Iraq receives the Pope under the siege by the U.S. military intervention and also terrorism sponsored mainly by Western countries. At Baghdad International Airport, the Pope was welcomed by Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi. Both later held a meeting with the VIP lounge of the airport. Pope Francis is currently at the Presidential Palace in Baghdad for an official welcoming ceremony. The Pope will pay a courtesy visit to President Barham Saleh in the private study of the Presidential Palace. Afterwards, Pope Francis will meet with different authorities, civil society, and diplomats in the hall of the Presidential Palace. Following talks this Thursday, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies decided to allow a slight increase in crude production in the face of fragile market demand. A statement issued after the ministerial-level virtual talks indicated that the participants approved the maintenance of March production levels for the month of April, with the exception of Russia and Kazakhstan, which may increase production by 130,000 and 20,000 barrels per day, respectively. The group cut production sharply last year due to a sudden drop in prices caused by the coronavirus pandemic, but agreed to gradually increase supply. However, the agreed increase was less than a third of the amount market watchers had expected.
We have a good agreement, a surprising agreement, but I know that, and because of that, we've elected to extend the voluntary cut for another 1 million.
On Thursday, the Russian Foreign Ministry stressed that sanctions imposed by the European Union regarding the situation in Ukraine will receive a proportionate response from Moscow.
We consider the European Union actions as another missed opportunity to abandon the dead-end policy of ultimatums and pressure, finally moving on to the equal and mutually beneficial collaboration in relations with Russia. As you know, Russia won't leave the latest unfriendly European Union act without a proportionate answer.
Officials in New Zealand issued a tsunami warning for coastal areas after a shallow, powerful earthquake that struck off the northeastern coast on Thursday night. There were not immediate reports of serious damage or casualties. New Zealand's National Emergency Management Agency warned of a tsunami threat along the east of the country's North Island following the magnitude 7.3 quake. Also, Guatemalan civil protection authorities issued a moving reach warning Thursday of the country's coast to the Pacific Ocean, following information received by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. Meanwhile, Peru launched a tsunami alert on its coast, but without an order to evacuate. United Nations Acting Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Ramesh Raja Sinjam, visited Burkina Faso on Thursday to assess the ongoing humanitarian crisis. The UN official reported that life-saving response must be scaled up to meet growing humanitarian needs in many parts of the country, and that credible, sustainable solutions are necessary to prevent this from becoming a protracted crisis with no endpoint in sight. The situation in Burkina Faso has been described as the world's fastest displacement crisis, with more than 1 in every 20 inhabitants forced to flee violence and attacks by armed groups in the north and east of the country.
We need to scale up the life-saving response now to meet growing humanitarian needs in many parts of the country. We've had increasing vulnerability, more displacement that we need to address. And secondly, we must act to prevent and act with credible solutions, sustainable solutions to prevent this from becoming a protracted crisis with no endpoint in sight.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. On Thursday, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean reported that in 2020, poverty and extreme poverty in the region reached levels not seen in the last 12 and 20 years, respectively. The rise in poverty was due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it came despite the emergency social protection measures that countries adopted to halt it. The annual report indicates that poverty is greater in rural areas, among children and adolescents, indigenous and Afro-descendant people, and in the population with lower educational levels. Meanwhile, the indices of inequality in the region worsened along with employment and labor participation rates, especially among women. The report also says that the increase in poverty and extreme poverty levels will be even greater in the absence of measures implemented by the governments to transfer emergency income to households. Given the situation, the Commission is calling to guarantee universal social protection as a central pillar for the welfare of the state.
Another thing that is important is vulnerability. This is something that we've referred to in other outlooks, and this has to do with social mobility. We could see that in Latin America, 491 million people were living on incomes up to 3 times the poverty line. That is to say, 8 out of every 10 Latin Americans are vulnerable, 79%, but it's 8 out of every 10 Latin Americans that face tremendous vulnerability, and therefore we absolutely need universal social protection systems.
And Bolivia has entered a period of electoral silence in the run-up to the regional elections to be held this Sunday, on March the 7th. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal informed that political organizations and citizens groups must conclude all campaigning activities during the period. It also indicated that violation of the electoral silence could be penalized with the immediate withdrawal of the propaganda and fines both against the political organization involved in the broadcasting media. The Electoral Authority also indicated that it's moving forward with the distribution of voting materials.
We have already concluded the assembly of the electoral cases containing all the sensitive material for each one of the polling stations, the bag containing all the disinfection and biosecurity materials to be provided to each one of the polling sites. Obviously, we already have the schedules adjusted and all the routes programmed for the distribution of the electoral materials in strict compliance with the Supreme Electoral Tribunal's instructions from the printing press where the material originates. We are talking about ballot papers, worksheets, the election return, which is an essential document, and the voting cards, the index list. So this material has already been reviewed. All the control measures.
Shopkeepers from a district in the Colombia capital, Bogotá, protested this Thursday to demand that opening hours restrictions imposed due to COVID-19 come to an end, so they can resume their traditional Madrugón event consisting of early morning purchases made by wholesale merchants.
At this moment, wholesalers, on whom more than 192,000 people in the entire production chain depend, no longer have enough to eat, and we need to reactivate the economy of these families. The problem is that our traditional madrugón, which means early morning sales event, normally takes place between 2 a.m. and 11 a.m. on Wednesdays and Saturdays, but we are currently constrained to work, like all businesses in Colombia, from 10 a.m. This means that wholesale buyers who would normally come to stock up to open their stores are not available to do so at this time.
On Wednesday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which bans law enforcement from using chokeholds and seeks to tackle impunity in cases of police brutality. On May 25, 2020, George Floyd died after a white police officer kneeled on his neck for about 9 minutes. The incident sparked widespread demonstrations not only in the United States, but worldwide against police brutality and systemic racism. The bill was passed on partisan lines of 213 votes, with no Republicans voting with the Democratic majority. The bill will not pass to the Senate, where its success is uncertain. Republicans favor a more limited police reform proposal that Democrats have dismissed as too small in the scope. At least 10 Republican votes are required to ensure the bill passes in the upper house.
Yet despite these protests, violence continues. We cannot accept this epidemic of injustice, which is why we will pass and send we have passed now. We have passed and sent to the Senate and to the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, so it can become the law of the land. Mentioned. It will not erase centuries of systemic racism and excessive policing, and it will not bring back George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, say her name, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, or the countless others who have been killed or harmed. But it will take a tremendous step forward to stop the violence, stem the suffering, and start to build a better America.
A session of the United States House of Representatives was canceled this Thursday amid high security after authorities warned of a possible plot to breach Congress. According to intelligence sources, conspiracy theorist group QAnon was plotting to attack 2 months after supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed the building. Heavy security measures were adopted and the Capitol was completely blocked off by a steel wall, which law enforcement was deployed across the state. Lawmakers and staff were advised to stay away after the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security warned that violent militia groups had talked about attacking the legislature on March 4th. Their bulletin also said the extremists remained motivated by unfounded Republican claims of widespread voter fraud. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. Italy announced on Thursday it was blocking the export of vaccines developed by AstraZeneca to Australia based on the European Union regulations. In a statement, the Italian Foreign Ministry reported that the shipment of 250,000 doses was stopped due to the continued shortages of vaccines in the EU and Italy and the delay in the supply of AstraZeneca. It was also noted that Australia is not considered a vulnerable country in the context of the pandemic. Authorities specified that Australia applied for the export permit on February 24th, and Rome forwarded it to the European Commission 2 days later, at the same time requesting its rejection. A shipment of 280,000 doses of Russia's Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine arrived in Hungary on Thursday, as authorities announced they were tightening pandemic restrictions in an effort to mitigate a rapid rise in deaths and hospitalizations. The foreign minister said the vaccines will be available to citizens immediately once authorized by the country's regulatory body. The latest shipment comes as Hungary faces another surge of the virus, with new daily cases and hospitalizations rapidly approaching their previous peaks of December. Thursday marked 1 year since the first confirmed COVID-19 case in the country and saw over 6,000 new cases reported, as well as over 150 fatalities, representing the deadliest day since December 23rd. The Director General of Cuba's Finlay Vaccine Institute, Vicente Pérez Bencomo, held a press conference on the vaccine candidates being developed in the country, noting the positive outcome of the combinations of the Soberana vaccines to enhance immunity. He stressed that the candidates have met all the necessary requirements for their approval by the national regulatory authorities.
The combination of this vaccine that really induces a very strong immunity, in terms of neutralizing antibodies and in terms also of T-cell immune response that is actually very well recognized as an important contribution for protection. We are very happy because we designed nine months ago two vaccines of Soberana 1 and Soberana 2, and we are happy to see now that Soberana 2 is moving very fast to the phase 3, but Soberana 1 is still alive, and the effect of all the membrane vesicle that we've used since many years on the anti-meningococcal vaccine has a very important effect on the immunity for the SARS-CoV-2 antigen.
On Thursday, the Philippines received more than 400,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine under the Global COVAX initiative. A plane carrying the shots was welcomed by the country's President Rodrigo Duterte on touching down at Manila Airport. The Philippines is among the first countries in Southeast Asia to receive vaccines through the COVAX program. The initiative is a joint effort by several global organizations, including Gavi, the World Health Organization, and UNICEF, and aims to provide millions of coronavirus vaccine doses to low and middle-income countries by the end of 2021. Several African nations, including Ghana, Nigeria, and the Ivory Coast, have already received thousands of doses through the COVAX.
I don't know how to express my gratitude to the donor countries. That you remember the poor nations is in fact already a plus for humanity. And in behalf of the Republic of the Philippines and of the people and all, I'd like to say again that we felt the gratitude in our hearts, and may God bless you for your benevolence. Thank you.
Venezuelan residents reacted after President Nicolás Maduro Moros reported that a Brazilian variant of COVID-19 was discovered in recent confirmed cases in the country.
I am a little worried, but as long as I keep taking care of myself, I think I should be fine. However, there are situations that get out of hand, and I hope my immune system is boosted. Otherwise, let's prepare for whatever comes along.
I think the biggest problem is that people have already got used to the pandemic. So the habit has led to carelessness. That, for me, is the main source of danger for the Venezuelan people.
Peruvian authorities reported that the country is facing a multiple crisis, with the collapse of the health system, the loss of more than 3 million jobs, and 3 different presidents in a single week during the pandemic. The political and health crisis intensifies as the country prepares for presidential elections. Our correspondent, Veronica Insausti, brings us more details in the following report.
Everyone's life has changed.
The pandemic emergency that was initially announced for 15 days in March 2020 persists until now, and in a worse context as during this period, 46,000 people have died, 3 million jobs were lost, 500,000 small and medium enterprises went bankrupt, GDP fell by 12 percent points, and the lockdown increased violence and social conflict.
Oof, terrible. We're out there trying to make a living every day.
The fear for our health. We don't know who is infected and who isn't. How to go out on the street. Our whole life has changed. Nothing will ever be the same.
We are all in this situation. There are no jobs. They have pushed us out of work. We have families to support, children in school.
We are confined, and if we have a sick person, we have to keep them at home, because if we take them to a hospital, it is terrible. There is no way to know whether they are going to take care of you and treat you well, and secondly, the jobs.
The pandemic revealed all the shortcomings of a state that has operated under the neoliberal system for the past 3 decades. The health sector, which was already precarious, collapsed with the arrival of COVID-19, and in 1 year has not been able to overcome the lack of personnel or provide the necessary infrastructure to deal with the emergency.
Absolutely nothing has been done to improve the infrastructure. It's deplorable that today we lack oxygen in 14 regions of the country, including Lima, which is the capital. It is really terrible. There is no way to buy it, probably because they are filling cylinders on the 3rd or 4th day, and sometimes it is no longer useful because the patient has died. We are in the same condition or worse conditions than last year, and they continue to deceive the population.
The credibility of politicians is almost null, due to the corruption scandals that have been dragging on for more than 2 years, the Lava Jato and Lava Juez cases, former governors and state officials imprisoned in prison, and a total of 3 presidents during the pandemic period, all points to an unprecedented political crisis.
All this has distracted from the pandemic. All this aggravates the conditions in terms of addressing the pandemic. The crisis is not over. It is far from over. In Parliament there are political forces that are pushing to destabilize the parliamentary board, even the President himself, and all this plays against the answers that need to be provided at a time of emergency, at a time when there should be national unity. In Peru, what we have seen is huge fragmentation, and this will also be expressed in the elections.
Citizen rejection of the political class is reflected in the polls, where none of the 17 presidential candidates reaches 11% support, with just 1 month to go before the elections are held. Meanwhile, the number of COVID-19 deaths and cases is increasing by the day, and the majority of Peruvians who have seen the incomes plummet are managing as best they can to survive.
Verónica Insausti, TeleSUR, Peru.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.